X factor final. It should be quite good fun this evening. It's a little bit different, but we'll get started straight away. On panel this evening, we have the finalists of the competition. We have Matt Hardwick, first proposition. Second proposition, Chris Lodge. First oppositions, Aaron Morning. And second opposition, Siddhartha Thiagarajan. I got that. I can practice we also have a judging panel this evening, which I can stand up introducing them. Chairing the judges tonight is our IB coordinator, Elliot Grayclough. You really don't need to clap the judges, no one will know. He's joined by 3 life members, not just so called because we can't get rid of them. But we have James Freeman, Josh Kinraid, and we have the last week's winner, Matt Gates. So this briefly is still his. I managed to.
That's still mine.
It's still the format, of course, is a bit different this evening, but I'll run through it quickly. Each speaker will get 5 minutes, and in that time, points of information will be allowed from other panelists. So the audience can't, other panelists can. They will be protected first and last minutes of debating. The judges will then go outside and discuss who they want to send through to the grand final, 2 grand finalists. In that time, the panel will be taking questions from the audience, and then we'll move on to grand final. But without further ado, I think we can begin. So the first proposition, please. The motion is behind me. Matt Hardwick, please.
The first thing I'd like to point out this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is that in all but name, this motion is already the status quo. The Civil Partnership Act of 2005 ensures that in terms of tax legislation, in terms of paternal responsibilities, and in terms of shared property rights, civil partnerships are exactly the same as heterosexual marriage. The only difference is that in heterosexual marriage they must both be of opposite sexes. In homosexual marriage they must both be homosexuals. So the fundamental change that we're making tonight then is in this use of the word marriage. We don't believe that the government, here on the proposition, we don't believe that the government should have the monopoly on the legitimate use of the word marriage in formal settings. We think it should be up to people themselves to dictate what they think their relationship is and to define their own relationships. So our model tonight is very simple. We will remove all limits on who can get married and who can't based on sexuality. We will end the legal distinction between civil partnerships and marriages based on sexuality. We will allow anyone who wants to form a partnership in society to register that partnership with the government, to call that partnership a marriage regardless of their sexuality, and any organisation, if it chooses to, will be allowed to recognise that partnership as a marriage. No, thank you. There are 3 reasons why I'm going to bring this forward tonight. Firstly, because I believe it better reflects the diverse nature of families and relationships in Britain. Secondly, because I think it respects the individual rights to identity to a greater extent. And thirdly, because I think it recognises the equality between homosexuals and heterosexuals to a greater extent than the current law. So my first point then, the days when all families followed the standard nuclear model are over. We now realise that the important thing is that a family be a stable and loving environment in which children can be brought up. And there is no reason to believe that homosexuals will be less able to provide this than heterosexuals.
Sir?
Yeah.
What is the reason that the state or the government decided to call it civil partnership and not marriage?
I'm going to come on to that at my third point, but I won't answer that now because I don't have time. So, in fact, in modern day now, due to IVF, due to the use of donors and use of surrogates, it's possible for a gay couple to bring a child into the world as well as look after one that they adopt. So the argument that families must be different because of heterosexual marriage must be different because it's the situation that children should be raised in is now outdated and irrelevant, and I don't think we should consider it. In fact, by preventing homosexuals from calling their relationships marriage, the government is in some ways sending quite a strange message. It's saying that homosexual partnerships aren't quite the same, they're not quite worthy of this title marriage. And we think not only is that extremely socially divisive, we think that it's insulting to families which currently operate under homosexual partnerships. And the government has no right to that, which will lead on to my second point. No, I won't take it. So my second point is the idea that it really respects our individual rights. We hold it to be true here on the proposition that 2 consenting adults have a right to define their relationship in a way that they see fit. We don't see any reason why the government should stop people from using any word that they want to officially describe their relationship. There are gay people in our society who are devoutly religious, who believe that they are married in the eyes of God, and that's deeply important to their spiritual beliefs. And who's to say that they're wrong? Likewise, there are heterosexual couples. Yeah, go on.
Well, I think the people who see them wrong are the churches that they voluntarily ascribe to.
Okay, so, they can subscribe to whatever beliefs they want to. We are told to different people can interpret the Bible in different ways. So they don't believe they're wrong, they believe this is true. Likewise, there are heterosexual couples who are married who see their marriage as nothing more than a civil partnership. And so they don't see a spiritual dimension. So why shouldn't these people be allowed to describe their relationships in exactly the way they want to? Factually speaking, allowing two homosexuals to describe their relationship as a marriage can't hurt anyone or do any damage to society. So we don't see why government should take action to limit it. If you don't like the idea of gay marriage, then I would suggest, if you're gay, that you don't get married and that you don't join an organisation which recognises a gay marriage. Moving on to my third point then, given all that I've said and given the things that my partner will go on to say, I don't believe that there is any reasonable social or legal grounds for having two distinct organs of heterosexual marriage and homosexual civil partnership. So let's look at the reason why they did, which is Siddhartha's point made. I believe that there is a leftover prejudice in this country from the days when our society was openly homophobic. Let's not forget that it was only 45 years ago that it was actually a crime to have homosexual intercourse in this country. That means probably the majority of people in this room, your parents can remember a time when it was illegal to have gay sex. That's kind of shocking to us, but we shouldn't be surprised that there is this residual homophobia left over. What we're saying on the proposition is that it's time to move past those prejudicial attitudes. We are saying that we should recognise the fact that people should have the same equal rights to respect their relationship as whatever it is, whether it be marriage or anything else, regardless of their sexuality, and that the nature of a person's sexuality has no effect on the loving relationships that they can have and how useful that is as being a building block of our society. So I urge you, ladies and gentlemen, for the three reasons that this will validate the diverse nature of families' relationships in our country, that it respects our individual rights to call our relationships what we want, and that it treats equal in our society to join me in proposing the motion tonight.
Thank you very much. Aaron, please, the opposition.
Brilliant. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's odd. Unfortunately, we agree on a lot of things. We agree on this side that there should be no division between heterosexual and homosexual couples. What we disagree on is the homosexuals' right to use the word marriage, because we on this side of the table fundamentally believe that marriage is a religious word, and it has religious connotations, and it has religious roots. And although in this country it has become a civil ceremony, we on this side of the table object to that. The integral aspect of a marriage is the religious belief in the union between two members of the opposite sex, and it is irrelevant whether they are procreative or not. Marriage is believed by all major religions to have been created by God. It is of paramount importance that we respect these religions by not calling relationships, official relationships between homosexuals, marriage. If they are religious, and I brought this up in my POI, and wish to be religiously married,
surely by that case you don't think divorcees should be allowed to use the word marriage either. A lot of churches and religions don't support that. Is that what you're saying?
No, a lot of churches within the past couple of years and within the legislation that was brought in have actually agreed to divorce. And those that do not, the Catholic Church in particular, yeah, that would be fine. They won't agree to divorce at all. What we're talking about here is the strict division between church and state. If within the church's realm they wish to not grant divorces, then that is up to them. Within the state, we are proposing on this side, or not, we're proposing that there will be a strict civil institution created. Very simply, we disagree with the idea that the homosexuals can form a union under the name of marriage. We agree completely with their rights to be homosexuals. We agree completely that they should be legally and officially recognised, but we fundamentally disagree semantically on the use of the word marriage. And we on this side of the table believe that we should look to other countries, an example where this whole issue has been circumvented. In France in particular, where there are pacts, what they call the pacts civils de solidarité, which are completely civil institutions, not marriages, but when 95% of those who ascribe to them are both heterosexual, 95% of official unions within France are these pacts, and those are both heterosexual and homosexual relationships. This is a completely civil institution to join together two people. No, I will not say that. Although it does not completely confer the same rights and advantages as marriage within France, nevertheless we hold this up as an example on this side of an institution created civilly, which does not confer the same religious connotations as marriage does, but is in effect equal. And we think that this whole issue has been very badly addressed been very badly addressed in this country. We feel that on this side it is time to finally separate church and state within the whole issue of marriage. We've had marriage, which was for a long time in Britain a Christian, almost completely Christian country, and the idea of marriage was a religious issue. Then we had it complicated by the idea of registry offices, and finally recognition by the state. No, I'm not thinking. Where the idea of marriage became a civil issue, and we fundamentally disagree that these two parts have become too intertwined, and that we need to fundamentally separate them. The state should not needlessly alienate religious believers by forcing them to have a change of meaning. And this is the fundamental point, that those who believe in marriage will be needlessly alienated by having homosexuals allowed to call themselves married. No, I'm not taking. We stress again that marriage is a religious institution that recently has become messily involved with the state, partly owing to our history as a Christian state, but also to fuzzy government thinking, we believe. We believe this has got to end. At the end of the day, this is fundamentally a very simple topic of semantics. We do not believe on this side that homosexual couples who are legally and officially recognised should be allowed to call themselves married, because we fundamentally disagree that that marriage is a religious term, and we fundamentally disagree in believing that it is unnecessary to alienate those religious believers who think marriage as a holy union between two heterosexual couples, and we think it would be unnecessary. Fundamentally, it would be bad policy making. For these reasons, we beg to oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any closing for the proposition, please? Chris.
Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to continue our argument on this side of the House tonight as to why gay people deserve the right to get married. And I'm going to talk to you about the classic 3 points. I'm going to make 3 points tonight. I'll go into some rebuttal in a second, though. I think my second point will tackle this quite nicely. I'm going to talk to you first and foremost about why there's a fundamental need for homosexual people to be recognised as married couples, not just an innate right that, it can't do any harm, so we may as well allow them. There's a fundamental need for this to happen. And I'm then going to talk to you about, which covers a lot of what Aaron was just saying, which is fundamentally flawed, that marriage itself is a religious institution. I'd like to point out to Aaron that marriage in this country was not formally recognised as a religious institution until 1753. Up until that point, it was very common amongst the lower classes to get married based on an agreement. There was no legal requirement for an official to be present. It was purely voluntary. So in this country, we've had a long history of marriage not being a specifically religious institution. And here on this side of the House, I'd also like to point out that, and this is my third point, is that we're not against, we're happy with the Church of, not the Church of Rome, I'm being old-fashioned, but the Catholic Church, or the Church of England, saying that we do not want to allow gay marriages on our premises. That's fine. What we're talking about tonight is civil marriages. There's a very important distinction to make, that civil marriages, like Matt laid out in the model, are very important to this country. And I'm going to go on to my first point now to explain why there's a fundamental need for such civil marriages, not just civil partnerships. Matt's already pointed out this underlying difference, and a completely arbitrary legal difference between marriages and civil partnerships. Why then, on this side of the House tonight, are we arguing that the word marriage is so important? Well, Aaron was right in that we do agree on one thing, that the word marriage itself is very significant. We're going to go on to disagree about what it actually means. But we are actually telling you tonight that marriage is important. And marriage is very important in our attitude towards people in our community who are homosexual. As Matt pointed out, it was only in 1967 that homosexuality began to be decriminalised, and in the last decade we've seen a massive increase in gay rights. We've seen in 2000, the fact that the Americans are struggling at the moment, that as of 2000 it was not illegal in this country to be openly gay in the military.
Isn't that primarily because the gay movement has managed not to annoy the religious movement or the religious power institutions that exist?
I've had enough of that, sorry. In this country, fundamentally, that obviously there are elements of religious governance in this country. We do fundamentally believe, particularly in modern Britain, that these are these rights are natural. we've seen that, apparently about 90% of Britons believe in equal rights for gay people. We've seen in 2001 the age of consent was made equal across the board. We've seen civil partnership in 2005. There is a fundamental need for our attitude towards gay people to progress to beyond the point where we're making this arbitrary and rather childish distinction between civil partnership, which is completely indistinguishable from a marriage, apart from in name. Now, why is the institution of marriage so important? This is my second point. Why am I telling you tonight that it's very important to say that gay people are allowed to have a marriage, not just a civil partnership, because we all understand under the law that protects people as it should. But it's very important to have a marriage because it's a fundamental part of our society. I agree with them as far as it is a cornerstone. I disagree that I think marriage has become removed from the religious institutions that in some senses started it. We recognise today that people can be married not just under multiple religions, but in a secular sense. That's the notion of the civil marriage. Napoleon, you were talking about France, Napoleon was one of the first people to enforce civil marriage, which is more important than the religious one. And civil marriages in this country are very, very important. A lot of people do it, as I pointed out. A lot of churches, very mainstream churches, and a lot of mainstream religions don't accept divorcees to be married. And that's why I'm telling you tonight that marriage as a word is very potent and very important. And that's why it needs to be opened up to the homosexual community at large. Now, my final point is that we need to recognise the right of people to object to gay marriage. That's not what we're saying on this side of the house, that we think that everyone who objects to gay marriage are homophobic. We're not going to throw around things like that. What we're saying is that marriage as a civil institution must be fair and equal, because it's only right in this country where we recognise the democratic rights of homosexual members of our community that they are recognised in their civil partnerships as marriages. And we are okay with that not occurring in churches. We are okay with the church saying we're all for gay rights, but marriages cannot occur on a church property. What we're talking about is mainly civil marriages within the state. Now, what have I spoken to you about and why is it important? I've tried to get across the idea that there's a fundamental need in our progression of rights towards gay people and lesbian people as well, that they are allowed to marry, that the word must be the same. And I've told you the word must be the same because of how much of a cornerstone marriage is to our society. Married people in Britain are supposedly, according to some surveys, the happiest. And often we deny that title to gay people. And lastly but not least, I've told you why marriage is why it's important to respect the differences on this issue. Civil marriages must be between a man and a woman, a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And last but not least,
Right. Mr. Speaker, we think they've made this debate rather easy by making it a semantics debate, right? Why marriage should not be called marriage and why it should be called civil partnership. We think that's the vital issue behind this debate, and certain arguments from that side have flown to tell you why gay marriages should be legalized and why it's all right. We're telling you it's natural, it's all right, all their rights need to be protected, but let's not call it marriage. And I'm going to talk to you about this in two terms, right? One, I'm going to see how homosexuality and particularly homosexual marriage is seen as an attack on religion, and that's something that we need to prevent. The perception of justice is sometimes equally important to justice in itself. Second, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk to you about how marriage is a sociologically religious construct and how the homosexual movement is in fact undermined by going into marriage and accepting marriage as something that they really want. And third, I'm going to talk to you about whether legislative change should precede a change in societal mindset. And all of these issues will refute a number of issues that they brought up. Right? So let's look at it in terms of homosexuality and homosexual marriage seen as an attack on religion. We need to recognize as much as Britain has evolved, we still live on Christian ideals and we're mostly a Christian society. But besides that, ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize that the political capital that religious organizations and religious power institutions possess is a lot more than the LGBT or the entire homosexual movement. That's something that they need to recognize as a political reality. Now, based on this premise, we need to recognize two more things, right? The entire notion of, well, we think that homosexuality or homosexual marriage is attacking religion. What does it do when you actually say, we're allowing you to call yourself homosexual? It provides more ammunition to the extremists and conservatives to say, this is what they're doing. They're enforcing a change upon us that we don't really have. And when we talk about identity politics, we think it's equally important to recognize identity of religion, right? We think that the identity of religion is also something you should be allowed to maintain, and that's why we're allowing you to have all the rights that married couples have. Just don't call yourself married. What's the big deal about it, ladies and gentlemen? You have everything, you fought for it, you're getting so much about it, and we don't think that it's so important that you need to be called married. Next, ladies and gentlemen, is this entire argument, what does it do? The benefits. That's something that they haven't addressed in a policy debate, and I'm surprised, right? The entire issue of this policy is it protects the rights of the homosexuals to have all the rights that marriage includes, but at the same time, it avoids offense to religion and it avoids persecution for homosexuals. What kind of persecution are we talking about? We're talking about persecution of the kind that religious institutions believe in terms of adoption, etc., etc. All of these are things that when you call it marriage, there's this inherent rigidity within religious institutions to recognize it. The more attractive one.
In that case, how can you possibly claim civil marriages? Do you think that atheists shouldn't be allowed to be married?
No, they should absolutely be allowed to marry if they want to. It's called a civil partnership, it's called the Special Marriages Act, it's called special for a reason. The entire argument is that we recognize it as a civil partnership for a reason, and this is where I'm going to talk to you about how marriage is essentially a sociologically religious construct. He tries to refute this argument in terms of saying it only evolved as a religious construct since 1750s, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it's a long time, isn't it, since then? So the point is, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a religious construct and society has believed that as a part of societal conditioning. The entire argument here is how the homosexual movement is undermined by asking for marriage. We think marriage is something that evolved as a religious construct that was said in the scriptures between man and woman. It creates a social perception of normalcy, that when you want to live together and you love each other a lot, you need to be married. We think it's a bad idea for the homosexual movement to in fact abide by this entire notion of normalcy with regard to a marriage, ladies and gentlemen. We don't really think the homosexual movement needs to pander itself to the beliefs of normalcy that society imposes on itself. A society that called us immoral and abnormal till the 1960s, right? We think it's really, really important for the homosexual movement as a matter of identity to reject the notion of marriage because we inherently see it as something that was draconian, something that in fact was responsible for our persecution and something that religious institutions did. Last, ladies and gentlemen, is this entire argument of legislative change preceding a change in societal mindset. We believe that a legislative change is going to precede a change in societal mindset. We absolutely fundamentally disagree with this entire notion. Why do we say this? We think that society needs to evolve and reflect legislation and not the other way around. You cannot have legislative changes that do not take care of safety nets such as preventing persecution in terms of how religious institutions treat homosexuals as outcasts or the kind of sermons that they give about homosexuals and say, alright, these people are weird, see, they've even taken over the institution of marriage that we created, this is how bad they are. We don't really want them to get that kind of ammo, and that's why we really say that a societal mindset needs to change before a legislative change is made, and we think this is vitally important to this debate. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the panel very much, and before the judges go out and make a decision, I think one more round of applause for the entire panel for making it the time. As the judges leave, will you there will be questions from the audience to the panel. There's no wine today, so I don't mind if it's in silence. Anyone has a question? Please pop your up.
Question, this is outside. Your argument basically is that fundamentalist religionists are a very grumpy lot, and if the gay movement pushes for gay marriage, they're effectively kicking the bee's nest, and that will result in their persecution. And then somehow that is their fault. Surely the right solution here is for the crazy people to change, not for the gay movement to change.
I'm not saying it's their fault. You need to recognize that I'm not saying that the religious people will blame the homosexual movement. They do that anyway. But the fact is that they're going to be persecuted further. And that's the problem, right? What is the homosexual movement all about? Having equal rights as heterosexuals? You're not going to achieve equal rights as heterosexuals by annoying religious bodies, because sad as it might be, this radical extremist fundamentalist groups, however crazy and erratic they might be, have a lot of political clout, and that's really sad, right? So you're not going to achieve political change in terms of legal equality, in terms of political equality, by annoying a group that has a monopoly over power. That's the argument that I was trying to make.
I think the crucial difference between us and the arguments Siddhartha made is that Siddhartha was talking entirely in terms of groups. He was talking about the gay group, the gay wing of society, the religious wing of society, and how they should interact with each other and what choices they should make. Whereas we're arguing to let individuals make their choices. So government should just recognise partnerships between people and then if people want to define them as marriage, whether they're homosexual or heterosexual, they should be allowed to. So instead of having individual saying, the gay people will be annoying the religious people, if a person wants to call their marriage wants to call their homosexual partnership a marriage and risk the wrath of religious people, they should be free to do that. Likewise, if a religious institution wants to recognise homosexual marriages, they should be free to do that. And other institutions and other individuals can make other choices if they want to. That's exactly what we say.
My fundamental issue with it is that we aren't just talking about religious institutions. They're not the only people who dictate marriage. And if they were, they'd be as divisive as marriage is considered currently. We've pointed out that a lot of people in this country are Catholic, and Catholic people don't recognise the right, mostly, for divorcees to get remarried. So what we're talking about here is they've tried to say, oh, well, this only applies to religious people, so that's fine, you can't offend them. But if Siddhartha's honestly going to sit there and tell me that he thinks that people who are non-religious, or people who come from a faith background who are marrying someone of another faith or of a different denomination within that faith, whose own faith do not believe they should be allowed to do that, is he telling them they should not be allowed to marry? That's essentially what you said.
Okay. The response to that is in terms of if you want to call yourself married, all right, fine. There's a distinction between private and public domain for a reason, right? Public domain involves an interaction with people who disagree with you, people who are a lot stronger than you, and you don't really want to annoy them. That's the problem. So you want to define yourself as a married inside your bedroom, go ahead, do that. But in a legal status, the fact is that you're not going to end up achieving a lot legally or progressing the gay rights movement legally if you call it marriage. That's the
entire point that a civil partnership already is legally recognised as identical to a marriage. That you're saying that there's a word marriage. Can I finish, please? You're saying there's a lot of value in the word marriage, and then turning around and saying, oh, but gay people don't. Then you make it trivial for gay couples. How do those two positions sit on the same? That doesn't work. You can't. You can either have that marriage is trivial, and I would accept that. I don't personally believe that. Some people do. Or you can have that marriage is an important institution and also a civic one. You can't have both.
Come back to that point on another question.
Okay. So entirely with regard to marriage, right? It's a nuanced argument. Maybe it was difficult to understand. The entire argument that I'm trying to make here is the notion of marriage being trivialized as civil partnerships is something that we need to recognize in terms of religious bodies have a problem with that. They should be happy with the fact that it's called a civil union. You have all the rights that a marriage includes, and the fact is that if you have all the rights, you shouldn't really have a problem with it. They should in fact reject it because this was the body responsible for their persecution. In fact, the gay rights movement is promoted further if they reject marriage.
Can I follow that up and say that if they do have a problem within their religion, then they voluntarily subscribe to that religion. If they don't want to, if they feel they're not being treated fairly within their religion, that's an issue for the religion. We're offering a fully state, the equivalent of a marriage, a complete state civil institution for heterosexuals and homosexuals.
Yes, but we're not saying on false.
My question regarding this distinction we keep making between civil and religious, and at the moment, under the law, Marriage Act 1949, when applied by religious in religious ceremonies and civil ceremonies, it's by definition a man and a woman. That's what it's been defined as.
So, and with the whole motion tonight is surely saying we would not limit it to that. I mean, I see
that's exactly what we've argued.
The difference is that if we're going to respect the rights of homosexual people, like we've said repeatedly, both of us, we also respect the right of individual religious organisations to say we do not condone that, and, or as the Church of England may have taken their stance, though we do condone civil partnerships, we will not have gay marriages within our institution. We couldn't have sat here and made a rights argument and then say, but we believe that religious people should be forced to have this within their religious buildings. That's not what we're saying.
Isn't that the problem in terms of the homosexual movement pandering to something that is defined as normal? Why do they want marriage in the first place?
Why don't they have the choice of it? That's more fundamental, surely. If gay people don't want to get married, the same way.
So you want them to have a primary choice in terms of deciding whether it's called marriage or not?
No, I want people, if they want to have a marriage between two people who love each other, they're free to do so. This isn't a bizarre view. I mean, the Dean of Westminster agrees with me. There are a lot of people within the religious, and I point out the Church of England, who I agree, and we respect their right, the Church of England's right, not to have gay marriages on their premises. But they do also embrace that it's a fundamental right for people to choose things.
Well, then hopefully they'll change and eventually they'll allow it.
If they want to,
but I mean, that's an issue for the religion.
Just with the wording of the motion, Would you not limit marriage between three heterosexuals?
No, but we'd say that, and it's been shown repeatedly, that I think marriage is the idea of a monogamous relationship, the commitment to a person. The difference me and Matt are making is that it doesn't matter if that person's an atheist of a different religion, the same gender, a different gender, or the other gender, or whatever I meant to say. But I don't think there's a distinction. If you're in a monogamous relationship, so this is really awkward, and you want to get married to that person, which most people who don't have religious marriage have civil marriages anyway, we don't see a problem with that.
It's interesting that you bring that up there, because that's an argument that quite often is brought up by the Republican side, that it somehow leads to a slippery slope and land in goodness knows what, but
I want to delineate between the standard opposition and I think what our tonight.
Okay, Chris, and what you said, what about in like Muslim countries when a man's allowed to have more than one wife? What does that make it?
Well, that's bigamy, isn't it? I think under the
So that's not marriage, even though in their religion that's still a marriage.
Well, under their religion, yes, they can consider that marriage. What we talk about is marriage under the law of this country. Like we pointed out earlier, we want to amend the civil law of this country so that a civil marriage can be between two men, two women, or a man and a woman.
In those terms, do Muslims here have a right to have 4 wives?
Well, no, because we have a bigamy law. If you want to
So there's no personal law at all. It's a uniform civil code. I'm just asking.
Obviously the bigamy law would presumably still stand. I'm not a lawyer. There's lots of people in the audience.
Well, there are certain cases where there's a special law board that allows different personal laws, criminal laws, which are uniform.
I imagine being a humble physicist, I'm not so into with the law on this matter. What we're saying is that those things like the fact that relatives cannot marry one another, and in the same fashion you cannot have more than one wife. And if you have more than one wife before you move here, unless there's a divorce recognised, as far as I'm aware, you cannot remarry.
It's the opposition. It's just if you believe that homosexual marriage is such a good thing and it's such a good thing that's recognised, why not force the women to recognise it? If it's so important that it is recognised, why not get rid of these archaic principles?
Because that's not what I think at all. The crux of our argument is that people have rights. The point is that recognising gay people having civil marriage, as I pointed out, a lot of heterosexuals have purely civil marriage, does in no way harm religious marriages or religious marriage as an institution. And I would never for a minute turn around to people and say that you cannot say, I'm fine with the Catholic Church not liking gay marriage. That's their decision. We talk consistently about civil marriages. I cannot stress that enough. You can't champion, sorry, Karen.
For me, it's a matter of personal identity. We don't think it matters necessarily whether a religious organisation, that person can choose whether they're a member of, exactly as Aaron kept saying. Whether that religious organisation, especially if you're not a member of it, or you've got a choice about whether you're a member of it, I don't think there's any reason to force them to acknowledge your marriage. But what I'm saying is I think you should be allowed to acknowledge your own marriage. You should be allowed to fill in, to tick the box on official forms that says, yes, I am married, I am in a marriage, if that's what you believe you are in. You should be allowed to define it in the way that you want to. You shouldn't be forced to define it based on your sexuality. That's my argument.
What about homosexual religious people who want to be married?
Well, they absolutely can be. I mean, there will be churches.
But they want to be married.
There are already churches which will marry gay people. All it would take is for there to be a church set up in this country.
And will
the same as the Church of England, right, other than that it allowed gay marriage.
So will the church continue to do that if it's called marriage? Don't they do that right now because it's called a civil partnership and they aren't going against the big churches?
I think some people will. I think religious people aren't one big group that you classify like this. They're individuals and they'll all make up their own individual mind about whether they want to be in a religion that supports gay marriage or one which says gay people can't get married. I think they should be free to do that.
And equally, you can exist as a gay person in the Catholic Church and also either struggle with or not believe you should be married under the Catholic Church's law. And if you do believe you should, that's a case to be brought to the Catholic Church as an institution, not a matter for the government to turn around and tell the institution what you can and cannot do. We're talking about the government enacting legislation that affects civil.
But if it's about personal identity, and like the personal identity is twofold, I don't think people have a singular personal identity, and my personal identity is religion and homosexuality. Then the state should intervene and tell you to protect personal identity in terms of saying religion should recognize homosexual marriages then.
Well, I don't think you're religious. Yeah, you do have a diverse identity. You are, as a sexual person, and a religious person. But it's up to you to reconcile those beliefs. You don't have to subscribe to a religion that's a mainstream religion. You don't have to say that your Church of England, because you agree with everything the Church of England said. You can have a spirituality or a belief that's not the same as one big cluster within our society. And there are always going to be, that's the great thing about our society, it's so diverse, and there are so many of us, that there are always other people that you can find who believe similar things to you, that you can have fellowship with. So it'll be perfectly fine under the system. There will be large communities of religious gay people, or religious heterosexual people who believe that gay marriage is fine. And I don't see why there's a problem.
Alison?
Siddhartha, you used this word normal to talk about heterosexual marriages, and you talked about how gay marriages, that's something special, it's something different, civil partnerships and that. I don't really understand this idea of normal because, I don't think there is anything abnormal about being gay. Of course, it is a minority thing. It is a minority of people that are gay, but that should not mean that we say it's abnormal, because surely then we can say things like people with ginger hair are abnormal, because they are a minority. It's all the same. You're just made that way. That doesn't make you abnormal.
That's an excellent question, and you should have heard my speech better, because what I said was it's a societal perception of normalcy. I didn't say homosexuality is abnormal or immoral. That's what it's perceived as by religious organizations. Besides that, marriage is defined as a normal institution that two loving monogamous people should be in, right? That's what the socially defined perception of what normalcy is what homosexuals need to reject. We shouldn't change ourselves, or the homosexual movement should not change itself, to pander to the definitions of normalcy as society defines it. That's the argument.
The issue with that argument is that we're not saying that every gay person has to get married. We're saying they can have a civil partnership, they cannot get married. It doesn't matter. The point remains is that if you are homosexual in this country, you're not afforded that most important cornerstone of society, which is marriage. It's not a fundamentally religious one anymore.
And we've said on this side that that's because there's been a fuzzy relationship between the church and state so far, and we plan to separate that. We agree on so much. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think, Alice, the two ginger people in the audience are grateful for clarifying. Any more questions?
Do a dance, John.
Who said that? Do we know how long it is?
No, I'm waiting to hear back from Elliot. Back to polygamy briefly. Do you not think it's arbitrary to say that two people can get married, whatever their sexual orientation, but three people can't? I don't understand why you distinguish between a certain number of people.
Well, simply put, because as Siddhartha just said, he didn't mention sexuality at all, which was actually quite telling. He said that a marriage, as in the marriage that we recognise in this country, be it, as I pointed out, and I'm going to get hoarse for saying more, in a religious institution or a non-religious one, marriage in that sense is a partnership between two people. We're not arguing that marriage itself changes. That's what they're trying to say we're arguing. But we're not arguing that marriage itself changes. We're just saying that the term, which is very important as they've admitted, applies to homosexual people as well. So, I fundamentally don't really agree. I think I'm going to live and say I don't agree with bigamy or polygamy or whatever. However, that's another debate. I wouldn't like to see it in this country, but that's different.
I'd like to use statistics on psychologically whether the children brought up in polygamous relationships or whatever has.
Well, I thought we can put the law argument, which is it depends whether they're probably not as successful, but that's probably because of the social norms rather than because they're inherently about that upbringing. So you probably wouldn't be as successful if you were brought up under a polygamous marriage. That's only because your society would look upon the traits that you had as weird, rather than because they're inherently worse. Shove at the back.
To the opposition, why can the Christian lobby deny perhaps homosexual people from using the term specifically marriage when they're happy to share that term marriage with other formats of it, whether it be Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or so forth?
Because all these religions in themselves have defined marriages, right? Like, it's not as if Christianity has a... No. It's like you're talking about marriage, then you can talk about different religions having different connotations of what marriage is. It's only an English term for what marriage is seen as. Christianity does not have a monopoly over what is called marriage. All other religions in their scriptures have something that is very similar or identical to other scriptures that's called marriage. So it's not about sharing it with other religions. It's about them not liking the homosexual community so much, and that's why they don't want to share it with them.
No, I mean, this is the thing. Marriage doesn't just mean one thing to one group of people. It's an incredibly ill-defined word. It's an entirely subjective definition of what marriage actually is. And this is something that this side, again, haven't tried to do, but a lot of people who would have been sitting there this evening would have tried to say that it's undermining exactly what marriage is supposed to be by trying to do this. And it's just not, because there is no good, strong definition of marriage that's used in that sense, apart from legal ones, which we try to argue are arbitrary. But it is something which is up to individuals to decide what they think their relationship is, and that's exactly what we've been arguing for.
But what we thought on this side was that there's a significant proportion of the population who strongly believe in the religious sense of the word marriage, and it would be unnecessary, and it would just be unnecessary for the state to say that officially their term of marriage is now to change. We just think it would upset.
Well, we wouldn't change the definition of marriage that religious people use. We'd change the definition of marriage that the state uses. Essentially, we're arguing that the state should keep it
goes back to societal pressure, doesn't it? If the state says that, the term changes, then religious people will be unnecessarily.
Well, people said this when divorcees were allowed to remarry, and it didn't happen then.
Or what didn't happen?
Well, you think that divorcees being allowed to remarry in most cases in civil marriages, you think that undermines the institution of marriage for religious people. But that's essentially what you just said, that you replace divorcees with homosexual people.
Not really, because there are very few churches or very few religions that have a particular problem with divorce. Mostly they have a problem, or uniformly all religions have a problem, as far as I know, with homosexuality, and particularly homosexual marriage.
The European Court on Human Rights has continuously rejected attempts by homosexual pressure groups to get gay marriage by the judicial route rather than the legislative route. And the reasoning for that is usually that, the court has taken the view that there is a legitimate state aim to promote procreation, and that marriage is a key element of promoting procreation in society and creating healthy, stable relationships by that way. What would both sides think about that argument as a reason for maintaining the current definition of marriage?
I said, because I read about that, and surely the problem with this is then that people who, for some reason, can't have children would then be recognised as married.
That's been dealt with by the court as well, and they've said that the reason people like that are allowed to get married is because there's such a statistically tiny proportion of the people who do get married that it's almost irrelevant to legislate for them.
But by that point, I haven't read also about it, I agree with that completely, but only about the contrary to what people said a few years ago, about 7% of this country is gay. According to the most recent statistics, it's probably only about 1.2 to 1.5%.
700,000 people.
And of that group, if you want to say, if the argument applies to people who are disabled and fertile as well, they're a minority group, therefore their marriage is somehow different or acceptable. And I think then if you're going to try and apply that logic probably applies here as well.
Well, we must halt there. The grand jury.
Right, thanks everyone for coming along. I hope you all enjoyed the debate. We had many heated discussions, very heated arguments. As you can imagine, with 4 keen debaters, 3 Live members, I think the debate was more heated than the judging panel than here, but only very closely. So thanks everyone for a great debate. And it was a very tough decision, but in the end we decided that Siddhartha Thiagarajan was going through. And joining him in the final will be the speaker from Proposition, Matt Hardwick.
Now, I think what's happening now is that they get participants get 10 minutes to go over the motions they're about to discover. In the meantime, Feds take over.
Yes, we've just got a few notices to go through. We thought we'd use this time while they're preparing for the next round. First of all, are they supposed to see the motion yet?
Not yet.
Not yet, right. We'll just be a second. Do you want to see it? Yes, right. Unless it's brief analysis, it doesn't need to be.
Okay, guys, nothing to do with them, so just bear with me a second. This is an employers event, and Ben's allowed me to plug it for a second. This is a shout out to anyone who's either interested in management consultancy, or if you haven't chosen a career path yet. This company is called Qedis, it's QEDIS. It's one of the fastest growing management consultancy firms in London right now. I'm a student ambassador for them, and we're holding a networking event on the 15th of March, 6 p.m, pitch and piano, free food, free drink, come along, it's really worthwhile. We've got 5 members of the press coming down from London, we've got the CEO, it'll be really worthwhile. If you are interested, come talk to me afterwards, I'll be in the room.
This is now the motion for the grand final. Quite long.
We rejoin for the final events of the show. 2 finalists have entered the room and they shall now conduct their arguments. Let us watch.
The last motion is to come down to side. No. Yeah. We've seen
I've won debates that I've literally could do Michael McIntyre.
I can't look at Michael McIntyre without thinking Michael McIntyre's doing a mat. Why is he doing that? Stop it. Elliot.
Just get on with it, John.
Good. Thank you everyone for waiting. The 10 minutes is up, so without further ado, the motion. The rules are each speaker will have 7 minutes to speak, with 2 minute summations at the end. Proposition first this time, and then the opposition. At the end of it, the audience will then cast a deciding vote on who they want to be this year's X Factor winner. So without further ado, the grand final. Matt, please.
I'm not going to read out the motion again because it's too long, but we've all had these arguments with our friends, I'm sure everyone in this room has, about which superpower would be the best one to have. And I've long been a believer that Wolverine-style immortality, and that's how I'm interpreting this, by the way, immortality doesn't just mean you live forever, it means you literally cannot die. So I've long believed that's the second best superpower after the ability to stop time. I'd also like to point out before we start that there are 2 ways to ask this question: would you like to live forever? If you ask the question to an audience, would you like to live forever, you normally get like a smattering of hands. If you ask the question the other way around, which is who in the audience would like to die, you always get no response at all. That is the response that is the question you're being asked to consider tonight. I'm offering you life and survival, the opposition is offering you death. And there's this you will not want to go on this, you'll felt that you've lived long enough to get to 80 maybe, and you'll go, oh no, my time is over. That doesn't happen, okay? You will always feel like you'll never want to give up and just die. And for the purpose of this debate, there is nothing going on afterwards, okay? Immortality means exactly that. You will live forever in this life, as opposed to the alternative, which is death. So I'd like to move on to my substantial points, and the way I'm going to look at this is I'm going to consider 2 possibilities. Either you accept the first option or you accept the second one, and I'm going to show you why if you take the first option of immortality, it would be great, and if you take the second option of having children and living a normal life, it would be substantially overrated and it's not really as good as you might think it might be. So the first point then, if you chose to be, on the first point of if you chose immortality, so the brilliant things that this would immediately incur. First, you would have enough time in your life to get as good at any skill as you want to get. All those things that you've always wanted to do, now there is time. You could learn every musical instrument you ever wanted to learn. You could speak every language. You could learn to fly planes. You could learn to race Formula 1 cars. All of that stuff that you wanted to do. You would have the time to save up the money and the resources to do it and to learn to do it. You could acquire every skill. You could get a degree in every subject. Anything that you want to do, any person that you want to be, you have time to beat them. This is an opportunity that no human being has ever had in the history of the world, and you'll be the first people to have it. Yes?
I want to see what happens after death. Can I do that with this?
With my model? Well, you can. The fact is, we're arguing about whether you would choose immortality. If you're going to argue that there is immortality after death anyway, then you are arguing for my side of the motion. So you're becoming really good at everything. Secondly, I'd like to bring up this point, you will regret it if you don't. As I've already said, there will come a time in your life when it will be time to die if you don't choose immortality. At that point, you will be saying to yourself, why oh why didn't I agree with Matt? Why didn't I pick one? Why didn't I decide to live forever? Because you won't want to die. Nobody ever wants to die, unless you're in huge suffering. And that's the other great thing about this motion. True immortality means there will always be a time when you will feel better. So if you... there will always, no matter how miserable you're feeling, no matter how suicidal you're feeling, you won't be able to commit suicide because you are immortal. Immortality, it says immortality. Immortality means inability to die. So you will not be able to, so you will live forever. There will always be a time later in your life, there will always be a time later in your life where everything will look up again. You'll be glad that you didn't die at that point. So you will be glad that you've chosen this option and you are immortal. So, the other point I'll bring is that otherwise you will find there will not be enough time in your life. If you pick the other option, if you agree with Siddhartha tonight, you will always have regrets. There will be things that there was never time in your life to do, and you'll be concerned and worried that you didn't manage to do them. Whereas if you go with me, then you will have the time, you will have the opportunities, you will be able to do all those things you've always dreamed of doing. So looking at the other side, if you choose to have children instead of becoming immortal, the first point I'd like to raise here is, if you were immortal, why would you want to have children anyway? The genetic imperative to have children is to pass on your genes. If you personally want to live forever, there's no need to do that, yes?
So some people just want to pass on their genes. There's no pleasure in raising a child.
Exactly. There is pleasure in bringing up children, but you would still be free to do this if you picked immortality. You'd have all the time in the world to adopt children, to raise children. They just couldn't be your own. And why does that matter? If you're going to live forever, you don't need to pass on your genes. You can have a nurturing relationship with anyone you want to, especially as there'll be non-immortals hanging around. You'll live for ages. You'll have a huge wealth of experience. You'll be able to teach and impart any knowledge you want. You'll have that ability to nurture and bring people up for your entire life, which will be forever. It's really a fantastic opportunity, and I can't think. And you're still able to have sex as well if you're immortal. Having unwanted pregnancy. So this is a better way of doing it. You get the brilliant side of bringing up children if you want them, but they'll never be forced upon you, and you don't have to accept them. Go on.
So immortality also includes a package of no erectile dysfunction, etc.
That's the problem that people are having, but I'm sure maybe you would make but you also do that if you are, or a lot of people also have that problem even if they're not immortal, so I don't think it's particularly relevant to this debate. The other thing that I'd like to point out is if you accept this, there will be non-immortal hanging around. There will also be people who have taken this medical route who are immortal. And you'll be very jealous of them, because these will be people who can acquire every skill, who can get brilliant at everything, who can do all the things that you would have been able to do if you'd made the right choice. And that jealousy will eat away at you until the day that you die, which then it won't. And I'd like to point out that these people, not only will these people include maybe some of your friends, some of your relatives, they could include the very children that you've given up your own immortality to get. Your children might choose to become immortal, where you didn't. So they will vastly outlive you. And while your life is fading away and everyone's forgotten about you, there will still be people hanging around who are immortal who've made the right decision. So those are the reasons that I thought you... Yes, go on.
So let's get this straight. Immortality means you don't age either.
Yes. I realised by stating it as Wolverine-style immortality that maybe didn't get everyone in on the fun, but biological immortality is cellular immortality, so you don't die. You regenerate every injury. You are totally invincible and totally immortal in every way. I don't know how it would work if you still age, because once you got to 200, 300, you would essentially be like a rotting skeleton, so biologically it would be impossible to be alive. I believe that any medicine which makes you truly immortal, in inverted commas, will make you youthful and in some way invulnerable to damage, because otherwise you wouldn't be immortal and you'd still be able to die. So those are the points that I've brought to you tonight. Essentially, I believe being immortal would be a brilliant opportunity. You'd be able to do all the things you always wanted to do. You'd finally have enough time, like no human being has ever had before. Whereas staying normal, passing on your genes, would be a decision that you would ultimately regret, and not something that anyone should have any reason to do when faced with the alternative of immortality. Thank you very much.
Very much, please.
Right. Mr. Speaker, Matt's done a really good job of selling immortality to you, because he said it's going to be wellness for life, you're going to keep regenerating, all these are really, really good things. Erectile dysfunction isn't, that's something that's children are a pain, you're going to pick up the immortal ones, raise them for a while, then you'll like dispose of them like puppies. All of these are really good. We think it's a stupid idea, really. And we think procreation is something that everyone should choose, and like some people should choose, particularly over immortality, right? So I'm going to make two arguments in the course of this match. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about how this promotes warfare, and that's really, really bad. Second, I'm going to talk to you about legacy for certain individuals is really, really important, and you should choose it because you want to see future generations, or not see them, maybe see them from the afterlife. Alright, ladies and gentlemen. And besides that, we're not making immortality arguments in terms of, alright, there is immortality after life, but some people just want to die. And if you choose this option, you don't have that option, because things don't always look up in life if you keep living longer and longer. Really. So, this entire argument, right? We're telling you, he tells us that, alright, you're going to be this Wolverine kind of person who's going to live forever. Well, let's look at the Wolverine paradox, right? He lived forever, he forgot everything, he doesn't know where he was. Who did I love? Where is the woman that I love? Who did this to me? Where is that general? I need to find that guy. That is the regret that Wolverine had for life, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't want to lead that life, because Wolverine lost the loved ones because they died. Besides that, he had to live a life that was alone. He didn't have any friends. That's why X-Men as a Wolverine part came out separately. No other friends stayed alive. Besides that, this entire notion of living alone and or living alone is really, really bad. Man is a social being, and we think that people who choose procreation and not immortality are people who are going to lead a better life. Why do we say this, right? And this is where it's going to go.
You don't have to be alone. This is not.
Yeah, lots of immortal other people will be there. I don't like the other immortals. Just because I made a stupid choice and others chose to make that stupid choice as well, I will not like them because they were as stupid as me when I chose immortality. The entire argument that we're trying to make here is why it promotes warfare, and this is really important. Imagine an army of Wolverines, right? You're going to keep fighting till that person dies, but he's just not going to die. Fighting and fighting and fighting more. Imagine this during the Cold War, ladies and gentlemen, what would have happened? US and Russia going at it, wasting away all resources, and this entire time argument, you'll always do better, you'll collect a lot of wealth. There will be no wealth left because man is very, very selfish. He wants the wealth for himself, and in this fight for wealth, when he's immortal, he's going to waste away life, he's going to live in a barren land with nothing on it. Go ahead.
The end of Pirates of the Caribbean, two immortals locked in epic duels until doomsday. Look, not only would it be brilliant,
that would every 15 years. Ladies and gentlemen, at the Pirates of the Caribbean, when he tries to make that argument, he's trying to buy into the Penelope Cruz argument and trying to get you to vote in his favor. That works in this debate, right? When he starts talking about Wolverine versus Penelope Cruz, I will choose Penelope Cruz any day. But the entire argument here is that they keep fighting. That is the entire argument. It's an epic battle. That epic battle wastes away resources. You don't really have time to do things that you really want to do because you'll be fighting more often than not. Trying to make sure that you have resources to build Formula 1 cars, or do bungee jumping because the ropes are with Russia, or ladies and gentlemen, go into the grasslands because that's in Africa, or see wildlife because that's in Africa again. Besides that, ladies and gentlemen, this constant warfare is something that we are not really for. And that's the entire argument that we're talking about. Besides that, the entire argument that he's trying to make is very, very populist based, right? We need to look at the entire motion and look at certain serious arguments behind this as well. You need to recognize this entire argument of stagnation. Why does society stagnate? Why does such medical technology evolve? The fear of death, ladies and gentlemen, at a number of times accelerates research. That's why people want to do stuff faster and faster because you might die. And that's why the fear of death is something that really helps people make other people's lives better. So before I die, I want to invent a drug that cures, say, AIDS. This is something that really, really motivates me, and that's the fact that it accelerates research. It acts as a benefit to those mortals lying around. It's not only about their wrong choice, ladies and gentlemen, it's also about a good life. It's not immortality plus a good life. It's immortality, that's it. And this entire argument that he tries to make in terms of life will always smile upon you at some point of time. When winter comes, can spring be far behind? We don't really think so, ladies and gentlemen. Some people have a horrible life. They have suicidal tendencies throughout life, and I want to die. That's the thing that I really want to do. But I can't because I made the wrong choice. And that's really, really bad, right? I think things are never going to look up at me, etc., etc. I got rejected at a bar by a girl. I think I need to kill myself. I don't really think those immortal women are going to like me because they're going to be so hot and so nice because you're going to regenerate, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to be as ugly as ever, being that immortal chap, and no immortal woman is going to like me. So I'm going to like a mortal girl is going to die, then I'm going to be sad. Immortal girls are not going to like me, then, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be sad. What am I left with? Pick up some mortal kids and raise them for a while. I'll get bored of that. So what is that? Right? Because of this entire argument that we need to recognize that sometimes it's better to die. Sometimes the best option is to die. Some people are really, really concerned about what happens after life. I don't think that this life treats me well. There might be a belief in an afterlife, say religion, ladies and gentlemen, etc., etc. All of these are things that you want to explore once you've gotten bored or once you get tired of trying out new things. That's also something that you can get tired of. All of these are arguments, ladies and gentlemen, that make sense in terms of procreation. The next argument is in terms of the legacy. Human beings have an inherent need to promote a legacy. It's not only about picking up children like puppies. It's not about animals. You create children at times to pass on certain traits to them, and you say, I raise this child as a part of my body. Besides this, women's rights, ladies and gentlemen, women want to raise that child, but they won't be able to. Men want to father a child, but they won't be able to. All of these are arguments, that period of pregnancy, all of these are things that some people really, really cherish. It might be something that you will hate in the teenage years, but after that, if life looks up on you, then you'll be happy about those children doing really well, ladies and gentlemen. These are things that humans need to keep in mind when they're thinking about procreation over immortality. We don't really think immortality is the best choice possible. There are a number of things that immortality brings to the table. It brings conflict. Besides that, it creates and prioritizes the selfishness of man over all other charitable options. And besides this, we really, really think that immortality is a bad choice. Let's not go around like Wolverine asking for who did this to me and why did he do it.
I thought Wolverine was a brand of Michelin tyre. For the closing summation, no more than 2 minutes, Matt.
Okay, so I get 2 minutes to rebut that pile of nonsense. The first thing that we heard, that was the substantive point in pretty much all this speech, is that somehow we'll have no choice but to spend all of our immortal lives fighting each other. Now, partly I think that would be very cool, especially do it for a few years. If you were completely immortal and you had awesome ninja skills that you picked up over your life, I really think it would be amazing. But, more importantly, there is no reason to fight if you are immortal. You've got, even for resources, you've got as much time as you want. You can build all the stuff that the other person might have. There is literally no reason to fight if you and the other person you are fighting are both immortal. There is simply no good reason to do it. Now, we also have this point that somehow you'll be lonely, or you'll be alone, or you'll be confused like Wolverine is. Wolverine is alone because he's the only person who has that. Some people would say it was a blessing, I certainly would. Other people would say it was a curse, like Siddhartha. But you won't be alone. There will be a lot of people who pick this option. We have you can pick up children, but they're going to die. Well, not necessarily. They might choose immortality as well. They might live with you forever. So I don't like this. We heard from Siddhartha that he won't like all the other immortals. Well, I know Siddhartha doesn't really get on with anyone particularly, but there are some people in this world who you can agree with, and some of them would make the sensible choice, and some with me and become immortal. So it's invoked by technological improvement, which means that will happen. So we also heard this thing. If he says we will at some point not necessarily feel better, then he's fundamentally misunderstanding what immortality means, what it means to live forever, or he's fundamentally misunderstanding statistics. No one is going to feel miserable forever. Everything looks better. It's that old parable about the guy handing the piece of paper that said, this feeling will pass. You will always have a time when you feel better, especially if you're going to live forever. The final point I'd like to make, and the last thing that I'd like you to consider this evening before I have to stop speaking, is that Think of all the things that you could see if you could live for another even 1,000 years. If you could live that much longer, if you could live forever, think of the things that you will grow to see humanity achieve. Think of what you would have seen if you'd been alive for the last 2,000 years, the incredible growth and development that would have happened. And that will still happen, because Siddhartha's argued that we won't have this technological improvement, but as longevity improves, so the invention of glass to make spectacles, it sped up our technological improvement greatly. Suddenly men could live longer and do better and keep using their eyesight to read books until they were older, so we became much wiser. That is what would happen. Technology would speed up, you'd see incredible things. Please vote for proposition.
Right. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why you should vote with the opposition today. Firstly, this entire notion of why you won't want to fight. Second, is the world better without a few people around, and particularly them living forever? That's a really bad idea. And third, whether this entire option is something that you should really choose, and a number of arguments that Matt, even though he tried in his 2 minutes, didn't really touch upon, right? We're going to tell you won't want to fight because you can build stuff when you live forever. We don't really think that's possible, right? Why do we say this? You can't really build oil because you live forever, ladies and gentlemen. Neither can you build green technology if you live forever. Even if you can build green technology if you live forever, that really long period where you're living trying to build green technology is a miserable, miserable life. And that's not something that you want to do. That's the entire argument that he needs to touch upon. Besides this, the argument is that man in himself is very, very selfish. And if you're to believe in those selfish motives, man is going to fight to prove that he's better than thy neighbor. And this entire argument is not something that is going to change with time. Just because you're immortal is not going to change the fact that you want to be better than your neighbor. And this better than thy neighbor attitude is going to create conflict, and it's going to exist for time immemorial, and that's a problem that we have. Besides that, ladies and gentlemen, the entire argument is the world better off without a few people? Imagine if people like George W. Bush Jr., Osama, etc., chose immortality. It's a really bad life. Let's also go to other extremes, ladies and gentlemen. We'll also go to other extremes because I don't want to make this an extremist debate. Let's say Mother Teresa also chooses a life of immortality. Really great, ladies and gentlemen, but we don't really think she would have done as much work then because of the fact that there are other people who take up the mantle. Sometimes you want to see that social intent and not only be the only person who's working towards that. Because immortality gives you the right to say, I don't care, there are other people who are living forever who will take care of that problem. And that is the entire issue. Right? If that Mother Teresa exists, society is not going to change, it's going to stagnate, ideas for research are not going to come up, and besides this, ladies and gentlemen, we are not going to procreate. Sometimes that seems good, but sometimes you really want to let them do it, and if people are suicidal, let them die. Thank you.
Before we bring tonight's in, I think one more round of applause for the 2 grand finalists who are going to which means that before Matt comes forward and presents his trophy to the winner, we have a closing vote. No abstentions, obviously, please. Eager to vote with the proposition. All the opposition, hands nice and high in the air, please. With the proposition, with Matt. And with the drafter, please. I'm going to do that. It's very close. I want to double check. And same votes again, please. With Matt.
Can you count to 100?
And with the drafter, please. That's consistent. The vote's up, we're up by 2, so and so I think therefore, the winner of this evening, Matt Hardwick.
Thank you very much.
Huge congratulations to Matt and all of our finalists. I once again a round of applause. Just one other thank you as well as to all of our judges and to John for showing for that. Thank you to Elliot for organising the entire X Factor. It's been great, we've all really enjoyed it. It's been an excellent final. Again, thank you to our panellists, to John and to all of our judges. Thanks very much. A reminder that you must take a free ticket tonight. We're heading off to the round now. Election nominations close at 2 p.m. tomorrow. If you'd like to email me before then, I'll come and speak to me now. It's been great. We're going to the round now. Come along.
This has been a production of the W Company. We phone you because no one else will. Good night.